Okay, so here we have our loop stitch indicators, and our loop yarn is what I call it. And so here's a straight segmented region, so we're going to knit that like usual. And then here's the next stitch is this stitch indicator. So it's a stitch indicator for this stitch, it tells where this stitch ends. And then it is also a segmented region in itself. So I'm going to put that around here and pull it up. So that becomes a stitch itself. And then again, this one is straight, but it's the next stitch. So it just wraps around. And then here we come to our next loop stitch indicator, which is also a segmented region. And pull that through, straight, loop, straight, loop, straight. And you see how all the colors are lining up to create their pattern. Here's our loop. So all the stitches fall into place where we want them to, and there's no way that they can escape. So here's the next stitch, because they're locked in. This is, this is a loop. It's not going anywhere. It can't slide over to this side. It can't slide over to the next side. So that's what makes the ability to have this pattern. So, and so these stitches aren't going anywhere. They're locked in. That's what allows this yarn to create really intricate designs. Nothing's going to slide. Now, this curls in because it is all knit on one side and all purled on the other side. And that's a technique that's used by knitters a lot, but it's a known problem that when you're only doing knit stitch on one side and all the purls are on the other side, it's going to curl. It's just a natural result of how the stitches are made. So that's one benefit of the split stitch yarn that we did, because it's not curling. And the reason it's not curling is because it's balanced. You have a knit stitch, and then you have the purl stitch, and the knit stitch, and the purl stitch. So, and that's that double knitting technique that we talked about. So this is beautiful on both sides, and it's not going to curl. So both are good in their own right. The disadvantages to this split stitch yarn is that you don't have many options as to what kind of stitches you can do. You kind of have to do a knit stitch. So a knit stitch followed by a purl stitch, and a knit stitch followed by a purl stitch, knit, purl, etc. And I think probably as creative as you could get would be purl, knit, purl, knit, purl, knit. So basically the same exact thing except the opposite. You really are limited. So the difference is that with this yarn, with the loop yarn, you can do anything you want to. So you could do, a knit through the back loop. You could do, you could purl if you wanted to. So this doesn't have to be all knit on one side and all purl on the other. It's just that happens to make the nicest design. But you could do purls on the borders, which is what people do a lot of times to anchor this kind of yarn and keep it from curling. You could do purls and then a big swab of purls here to anchor this from curling. So even though this is kind of fuzzy yarn and it's not wanting to be in the right hole, there we go. So this, I can purl it instead I'm going to knit through the back loop because it's on there wrong. Or I meant purl through the back loop. So I just purled it, and then I can purl this too. And I can purl this. I can knit it if I wanted to. I could knit two together. So knit two together is this kind of stitch. So what that would look like is this is the next stitch. So that's one knit. And here's my second knit. Or actually, so knit two together would be just like that. So I am knitting these two stitches together. And then I could knit one front and back, so that's, you know, knit like this, and then I go through the back side of the same loop, and I take my second stitch, which I just didn't pull this one through enough to show. Okay, so here's my second loop, and although I ran out of yarn, you can get the point. So here I'm pulling up the second loop, so that's an increase. This was one stitch, and now there's two stitches there. So my point being, there's a lot of flexibility with what you can do with this kind of yarn. I didn't flip my yarn over there, so sorry. Haley might have caught that. Anyhow, there's a lot of variety of different stitches you can do with this. It's not locked like this yarn is locked. So for most knitters who, or at least advanced knitters, who like the freedom to choose what kind of stitches they're going to do, or to do different patterns, they would like this loop yarn better. So for example, they could do purls around the boxes, purl stitches, and to make them pop more. So that's the advantage of this yarn. It's also actually easier. It's easier to knit than this yarn. The split stitch yarn would need to be probably made with a little bit of a stretchy yarn, ideally, because when you're knitting it, sometimes it's hard to, so you knit one side and that's fine, but then when you're purling the other side, you kind of have to get this around the needle, and so that can be challenging. But it shouldn't be dismissed for that reason, because it still produces, you know, this really nice effect. So it's still worth having in the patent. This, however, this loop yarn is so free. You can do so much with it. It's not tethered like the other one, that it's a lot easier to knit with. Alright, so let's move on to Claim 7Y. So Claim 7Y is it's describing this over here, and let me get it into